Welcome to the Early AI podcast. My name is Seth Earley.
And I'm Chris Featherstone.
Really excited to introduce our guest for today to discuss some of the misconceptions around AI, some of the ways that we can think about AI and Web 3.0, how blockchain and cryptos technologies fit into getting the greatest value from AI and from machine learning and from agents, and really talking about some of the challenges that are facing implementations of AI and how assigning value to those interactions and those transactions can really start to release the real potential of AI and agents and really incentivize exchange of value and exchange of information across the ecosystem, and really to start to turbocharge how people are implementing and getting value from AI. So our guest today is a seasoned technologist. He has over 20 years of experience in machine learning and IT consulting. He's worked for some of the largest companies in the world, like HSBC, L'Oreal, AXA. He not only has co-founded cutting edge AI projects such as Ocean Protocol, but he's now at the helm of Nevermind, a company revolutionizing the way AI agents interact with financial systems. Don Gossen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. I know it's already 2025, and I have not made the mistake of writing 2024 on any of my checks. So,
well, lucky you. I don't write checks, but I'm definitely writing 2024 on stuff.
I actually do still write some checks. There's like the dog sitter, the dog walker. He gets a check, every Friday he gets a check, and I make it out. So I still do.
Well, pretty soon you'll have an AI that will be paying your dog walking robot via Nevermind.
Well, there you go. That's really funny. When you start thinking about what's in store for us in 2025, I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening. So I wanted to start off with conceptions that you run into about AI. Given your background, what do you see as some of the biggest misconceptions that people have around AI and machine learning, particularly regarding integration with their systems, with regard to information architecture? But give me your take on what you're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because people are
funny.
I would say strange funny. I mean, coming out being in ML for as long as I have, it's also kind of haha funny that this hasn't actually been recognized yet. But so there's this perception that what's out there now, AI is new, right? When in actual fact, AI, this is like, the synthesis of arguably like 70, 80 years worth of work, right? It's a culmination of all of this. So, I find that to be both shocking and humorous at the same time, that people have that perception. It's the other sort of shocking and humorous aspect of this is it's still the same problems consistently, right? Your model and the inference, for example, is only as good as the data that goes into it, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So garbage pertaining to both, obviously, the data from a training and then a contextual point of view for inference, as well as the algorithm, right? And the sophistication of that. And so I think what is relatively new is the model or algorithm architecture, right? Transformers being, kind of the most popular in-demand archecture at the moment. A lesser but not forgotten architecture would be like the diffusion models for images and that sort of thing. And what we've seen is
retrained transformer. That's the
right, exactly.
That's the transformer, meaning trained it on a set of data, and then we are able to transform other data and other use cases with that same set of training and those same weightings and so on.
Right. It's in effect a way of compressing the data set into like fine slivers of filters, for lack of a better term, and then compressing all of those together so you can reconstitute the input information without having the same size of data set that exists on the input side.
Yeah, and in simple terms, it's transforming one language into another. It's transforming a question into an answer. It's transforming one piece of data into another piece of data, but it's really basing it on the learnings from a very large data set and then applying that to a smaller data set.
Yeah, what it's doing is, I mean, if you look, not to get like overly technical, and we are going to exhaust my technical expertise if we go super low level, but it's really about establishing the connections effectively between words, and then through vector math being able to identify what's called the next best word in the case of
Yeah.
transformers, right? So it's this
Yeah.
proximity algorithm that basically says, like, here's this word, the next best word, based on the overarching context of whatever you're trying to resolve to. The next closest word in the context that you're trying to articulate is this, right? And
Yeah.
so that is in effect what the latent space, or this like soup of zeros and ones, actually represents.
And what's so interesting is we can say it in that way, and we can say it's a prediction mechanism, and it's just predicting a likelihood of the next word in the process, in the response. But it gets so complex and it gets so interesting. It's so sophisticated. And when you start thinking about how some of these models are starting to be Machiavellian and can be deceptive in certain contexts, where you're looking at theory of mind, it's really hard to square that with, oh, this is just a predictive mechanism, right? I mean, the manifestation of this and the characteristics and the power and the complexity. I mean, it's just mind-boggling and astounding. But it breaks down to that simple explanation you provided. But it's really hard to kind of get your mind around the fact that this is just a prediction mechanism. So,
I mean, it's in effect, it's less prediction and more recall, right? It's just um, uh, uh, the information that it's recalling is just far greater than what you and I can recall, right? It's corpus of information that has been compressed and can then subsequently be recalled into next best action or next best word or whatever, is far greater than any single human, right? So, it is predictive in the sense that it's less, I would argue, predictive and just non-deterministic, right? You don't know exactly how it's going to respond. Though if you know the entire corpus of information and have an overview of that, of the topology of the model, you can discern what course of action it could take, right? And this is kind of like this new idea of reasoning and the ability to let a model think. It's just like taking different permutations of this corpus of information and coming up with new outputs. Anyway.
Chris, you
So
had a comment or question?
I was going to double click on something you said. So, just in terms of it being, almost laughable, right? That this is quote new, right? And I'd love to get your take too on, because where I see a lot of people missing this is also knowing how to plan for it commercially and business wise. It's one thing to understand the deep, what it does and what it's for, but I think there's also a huge miss on it being new, and people do not know how to plan for it and or budget for it or anything like that. What are your thoughts? And have you seen those types of misses as well?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I'm less on the enterprise side, right? And looking, we're out on the edge. We're trying to get AI agents. We're trying to enable AI agents to pay and get paid, right? And to say there's a lot of corporates that are focused on this at the moment, I'd be lying. It's more.
Nobody focused on what you're doing for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully more than just nobody. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely, it is definitely new and novel and fringe. I think what we're going to see is standard issue new technology adoption curve, right? We're definitely headed into the proverbial Gartner trough of disillusionment, where what we have right now is likely a bunch of CIO and CTO offices ramping up on AI skills, which means bringing in a whole bunch of consultants, like I used to do, to try and tell them what they're going to do, right? And likely, overshooting budget and underperforming on the output. A lot of this, look, I mean, that's not to fault necessarily the process, because that's how it works, right? I think you distill what's useful as an organization through the process of trial and error. But I do think there needs to be recognition of sort of the historical issue of, proper data management, model management, access control, all of these things that are sort of known requirements to make your analytical systems perform or performant. They're still requirements. And they're probably more important now because of the speed with which a model could be non-deterministic, could hallucinate. Right? What these architectures do is it makes it more familiar for people to leverage. The interfacing has come, the sophistication or the complexity of the interfacing has been drastically simplified. Anybody in an organization can really interface with like back-end technology in natural language. And that at the same time exposes anybody in the organization to information that maybe they shouldn't be privy to, right? So there are all of these concerns and thoughts that need to go in to the overarching process. Now, what's very interesting is the capability when you introduce reasoning over these corpuses of information, enable you to effectively create, like double down on that interface, right? And leverage the model further than models or algorithms have been leverageable in the past, which quite frankly is it's likely going to lead to a lot of displacement. Because these roles that were sort of anchored to repetitive knowledge-based work, right? You're an expert in something. Reporting is like one of the likely candidates for all this. These tasks, when wrapped in like business process optimization technology and that sort of thing, workflow management, you're just going to be able to, you're going to be able to replicate that functionality quite easily.
The one thing you said too, which I think is interesting and I think also misses the trough of disillusionment, is all the cool innovations or really valuable innovations that come from each of those points. So like you guys, early innovators, who's innovating in the trough? There's that almost that mirror that needs to be seen on where the laggards, and innovation comes there. Innovation comes at all those different points. I think people miss too.
A lot of what goes on in that trough of disillusionment is like the industrialization process, right? Like the true application of traditionally what would have been referred to as ML ops is now being applied to AI in the form of observability tooling, right? And really, if I were to kind of extend what we're doing observability on AI, what's actually running, but we're accounting for it. We're strapping an accounting module to this and saying, okay, this is what was actually used from like a GPU cycle point of view, tokens in, tokens out, and then translating that into a settlement cost for the requester. So yes, it's the same process that's always existed. What's nice is that now, I mean, okay, this is gonna, depending on who your usership is, this is going to sound a bit crude, and I'm not trying to be distasteful, but like I look at this as very positive, right? We're kind of removing the weakest link from the process, which is in a lot of cases you and I, and replacing it with this thing that, okay, you argue, well, they're non-deterministic. They can hallucinate. Yeah, but so are humans. Humans are non-deterministic. We hallucinate. We sit there and daydream, right? And forget to like click something during a workflow process. What do we do as an organization? Well, we wrap these processes in processes, right? To prevent and mitigate against that, daydreaming risk, for example.
Wait till AI has it.
Sorry, I missed your part that was distasteful. You were saying,
well, it's just this is going to lead to a lot of displacement and discomfort for people, right?
Say again.
It's going to lead to a lot of discomfort.
How so? How so?
Well, it's people are going to lose their jobs in all likelihood and be replaced by AIs.
But tell me where. So it
I mean, the head of Klarna, just as like anecdotal evidence, 2 Sundays ago came out and was like, "I'm the CEO. My job is toast in a few years."
Who said that? Who said that?
That was the CEO, founder of Klarna, the payments company that lets you pay in installments, right? They're one of the leaders, I think, in AI adoption and agent adoption, right? They've offset a significant headcount internally with these fully automated processes run by agents. you got Reid Hoffman coming out and saying like Salesforce isn't hiring any more engineers, right? We're gonna build agents. Now, some of this is marketing, but a lot of it's true, right?
Or will be.
And I gotta say, like, okay, we just did a round, right? We're out there hiring, and you can see the displacement. It's not necessarily directly related to AI at the moment. It's more, it's more sort of tech companies tightening their belts. But there's a lot more engineers out there than there have been in the past. Like I've been an entrepreneur for almost a decade, and this is probably the best time to be hiring that I've had with respect to kind of the skills that are out there to be had. And I think that is just going to continue to grow and depending on your perspective, exacerbate.
So tell me more about the work you're doing at the intersection of AI and Web 3.0, and how are you defining Web 3.0? And then what does it really mean from a practical perspective to be able to ascribe value to certain pieces of an ML workflow? So, one of the things you were saying in our prep call is that right now it's metered, right? It's not about value, it's about usage. So are you using it? How many tokens are you using tokens in, tokens out? Let's, look at your quota, let's look at your max, let's, pay by this metric. And then it's about usage. But you're talking about ascribing value to insights or transactions or whatever. So how are you kind of beginning to do that? And tell me more about, I know there's a bunch of questions in there. So how are you defining web? And then how are you looking at the intersection?
So, I mean, Web3 it's crypto, blockchain tech, right? So at the risk of turning the next 30 minutes into a 30-hour conversation, I'll try and condense, the history of all of this. But as you mentioned, I've been in the ML space for 20 years. As we've been discussing, you need to understand the inputs of an analytical solution, right? So the data sets, the algorithms, and then everything all of the actors that are sort of touching this pipeline as it moves towards an enterprise landscape, we call it the actionable insight, right? AI parlance, you call it the inference. So really you're trying to answer 4 basic questions. Where's the data model coming from? Where's it going? Who's using it? And what are they doing with it? Right? The inability to answer just one of those questions undermines the entire output. Right? Like there's nothing worse as someone on the analytics side, if you go into a meeting, you're a data scientist or whatever, you go into a meeting and you present information as an actionable insight and as kind of as fact, and then somebody's able to undermine that by pushing back and saying, where did you get that? Where's the data from? Where's the model from? How did you leverage this? Where did you deploy it? Right? And so you need to have high fidelity on each of those questions. The problem is that existing contemporary infrastructure that enables you to do that is dog shit. It's not very good, right?
Yeah.
It's usually a patchwork of it's a super technical IT term, so most of your audience probably won't get it. But yeah, that's just the case, right? It ends up being like you create these bespoke tracking solutions that are very patchwork, right? And they don't work very well, and they definitely don't scale, right? And so beating my head against the wall for a long time. And then in 2016, I got introduced to crypto, to Web3, and, the light went on, right? It was a bit of a eureka that blockchains are very elegant solutions to the provenance problem, because that's what we're talking about. Understanding the provenance of a model, of the data set or data sets that go into training, as well as the outputs, and understanding all of the systems that came together to create this output, right? And the higher the fidelity on each of those different components, the more trustworthy the output, right? And then arguably the higher the value. So my motivation in getting into this cross section, right? Merging what are inherently very divergent technologies, right? ML, AI technology is very centralized in nature, optimally so. And decentralized technology, blockchains are the exact opposite, right? So merging not just technologies, but also paradigms creates all sorts of conflicts. And so I've spent close to 10 years trying to manage these technologies kind of butting up against one another. And what we realized, so payments, settlement, attribution in particular, understanding that provenance history to a fine degree of detail to the point where you could actually provide rewards or payments at the same level of granularity. Payments or rewards were always a big part of this, right? So you create an output, you capitalize offset output, and then you reward all of the contributors that help create that output, right? And so this payments and settlement piece has always been in parcel of the solution. What we realized 24 months ago is actually it's the most critical piece. You can have all of the reward attribution technology that you want, but if you can't capture the value created in the last mile, there's nothing to actually reward or pay out, right?
Exactly.
And so we shifted focus into specifically just drilling in to this payments piece. The catalyst for this was the diffusion models initially, right? That Stability AI released, and then catalyzed by ChatGPT from OpenAI that really exposed way more people to the capabilities and unlocked this easier interface, right? And it's led to this explosion in adoption. And what we saw back then were builders at that point, they were like RAG tuning. So retrieval augmented generating models to do specific things. And people would release them into the wild through different platforms. And they get like hundreds of thousands of users that would come in.
Right.
And these builders would all have to underwrite the cost of that.
Right.
And so what we saw was like builders trying to strap Stripe onto this interface and charge like $5 a month, right? But you'd still get like a power user that would come through and consume all of it. Because at this point, if you recall, ChatGPT in particular was like quite limited. If you hit your quota of tokens, boom, your service went down, right? Like they froze. Right? They throttled you to the point where you couldn't use the service anymore. So this was happening to these builders. And so they were spinning up new connections and things like the more sophisticated ones. Anyway, they were having to underwrite the cost of all this. And so we saw effectively these cottage industry businesses go out of business because you guys were footing the bill. And we just thought that this was stupid. And we realized that in this sort of journey to get to this laser focus on payments, we realized we'd actually built a solution. And this goes back to, you alluded to this, but it's taking the metered cost of running a given AI service to take a slight detour. I like to describe an agent kind of like a platform, right? It's the sum of its parts, right? It's a compilation of different tools. Namely the models, right? So it's got like access to a particular series of models, GPT series, but like from OpenAI, but it could be from different vendors, et cetera. But then you also have, the orchestration capability from like a LangChain or LangGraph or what have you. You might have contextual data coming from a vector DB like Pinecone or whatever. And all of these things get put together. They all have associated costs for accessing and using, right? That's the observability piece, right? So when you run an agent, you want to have like access into a perspective into like the ML ops that's going on with your agent with these probably third-party services because you're probably not running this stuff yourself. You've compiled it into the form factor of an agent. And so you've got GPU cycles or tokens in, tokens out with these different models. And these different models have different requirements, right? I could be a simple user. Seth, you're a power user. We can use the same agent that Chris built, right? But we're completely divergent personas, right? I submit my simple request to Chris's agent that gets decomposed and routed to a model that can handle the like my unsophisticated requests. Let's say it goes to GPT-3. You, on the other hand, power user, you submit a multimodal request to Chris's agent. That's got to go to a model that can handle the multimodality, GPT-4, 4.5, what have you. The spread, right? The cost difference between instantiating GPT-3 and GPT-4, 4.5 is like an order of magnitude or two a difference, right?
Exactly.
And so taking that variability and accounting for it and translating that into a settlement cost is non-trivial.
Of course, of course. And so what does it take to start to do that? I mean, what does it take to
Yeah.
begin to deconstruct that and to understand
Well,
that? Yeah.
first, it takes recognition of the problem, that that's
Yeah.
actually something. And then second, it takes, selecting the tools that are available to you at that given period of time in order to enable, the solution that you've identified for that particular problem. Right. And so we look at this again in sort of the larger picture of what's going on in an analytical workflow, right? Using a blockchain to understand these compartmental pieces that are going in and then decompose those and understand how the result set is actually being generated and then provided as an inference, all of the different counterparties that go into that potentially, right? Or even just the different solutions, the tool stacks that go into creating this form factor that is the agent, accounting for all of that, and then passing that off into onto the requester. Doing that in a pure digital manner just seems to make sense.
Yes.
And blockchains are by and far the best solution for both of those functions, both the provenential piece, right? Establishing that integrity and identifying sort of the attribution component, but then also on the payment and settlement side.
Right.
Because you can invoke contracts to control the access and all of this.
Right. So what is a simple use case? So where do you begin this process? Because again, I imagine there's a lot of complexity to it. And, what are your objectives in terms of how to get this to market? Like, where do you see the low-hanging fruit for you?
What do you need in place, right? What do you need in place also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first off, you need like the mindset that you want to adopt this. That goes without saying, right? So you got to find those counterparties that are going to be open to this from the get-go. Because look, the honest answer is a lot of what's going on in the agentic AI side of things is being underwritten largely by VC. So that whole like issue of I'm going to run these operations, right? I'm just going to charge you like a set amount. I don't really care if that $20 a month for each user is actually costed out properly, because I got a bunch of VC dollars sitting behind me that I'm just going to underwrite if I go over. So that's part of what's going on. I will, again, sort of taking a side step here. This stuff's moving so quickly that these services, our perspective is that these agentic services are going to commoditize faster than prior generations of technologies. And so it behooves us to have this mechanism in place ASAP. So as we push toward, you hear it already, right? You got like Sam Altman and stuff like that talking about the cost of generating an inference is going to get pushed to zero, right? And so where you're going to eke out a business is in the margin. That requires having like incredible insight and accuracy into your cost center, your OpEx, in order to eke out that margin relative to your competitors, right? So doing this like accounting on the observable piece and translating that into settlement as quickly near real time as possible is going to become, in our opinion, the primary driver for this. But to get back to kind of where is this applicable? It's quite interesting. Like it's actually applicable across the board, right? We're seeing that. And this is why the earlier part of the conversation was relevant, right? Because it's going to displace a lot. And so just for kind of sake of example, one of the use cases we worked on was this smart energy grid management solution, right? This is something that's been talked about for like 10 going on 50, right? Easy. IoT is going to change the name of the game. And it turns out these networks plus the information that needs to be consolidated to make the grid actually smart lacked the level of model sophistication, not discreetly, right? Historically, you could create a neural network that could perform a function really, really well. The issue was it only worked for that one use case, right?
Right.
It wasn't really scalable, right? You could do some transfer learning, but it wasn't really scalable beyond like that use case and use cases within proximity. Now what you have are agents that kind of just, again, they have this broad knowledge base that can do quite a bit. So really what you're tweaking is like the tool selection and the reasoning capability, which turns out is a lot easier than, we thought because of the way that these things have been architected. And so where we're at now, so we worked with a couple other Web3 crypto organizations that are in what's called the decentralized physical infrastructure network space, right?
Okay.
IoT in historical parlance. So the layer one, the blockchain that we worked with is called Peak, PEAQ. And on top of that is a company called Combinder, which is building a DePIN solution on top of Peak Network. Combinder, they're based out of the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland in the EU. And within the EU, if you're a retail producer of energy, you can actually sell back into the grid. Unlike in North America, or the US in particular. You can't, I guess in certain states you can, but broadly speaking, in the US, you cannot sell back into the grid. In Europe, you can. And in Germany, and actually in the DACH region, solar panels have become so popular. People are building like fences instead of using mesh because it's cheaper to buy solar panels than it is to buy like the mesh or wood to make a fence. And you now have to pay to put the energy into the grid. So they have this like massive overproduction. But Combiner is looking at how do we create these like local area networks from a retail point of view, where we have all of this production from solar panels, wind turbines that like I might be producing. But my neighbor wants to like hypothecate that. They want to consume energy from me. They don't want to consume it from like a natural gas power plant 500 kilometers away. Combiners bringing together the information, the data sets, and ultimately the network that's like the physical network that's deep in that's going to enable that in conjunction with Peak. So we worked with them. We strapped an LLM based model, an agent, to an HVAC system, an air conditioning unit. That agent goes out and acquires the data feed from Combiner through their API. Combiner is using Nevermind to enable that payment. And the payment is done in the underlying DePIN's crypto called Peak. So you're not paying USDC, you're not paying like a stable coin, you're not paying ETH or Bitcoin, you're paying that native network's token. Well, you aren't. Your AI is that's strapped to your air conditioning unit. And then in this use case, the air conditioning, the agent is tasked with not determining when it should turn on and on because of optimal price, but when it should turn on and off based on overconsumption of energy. So starting to take back some of that energy for your neighbor, turn on so that like your neighbor doesn't have to pay to push that into the grid, for example, right? So you're creating this holistic benefit for your local area network, your local ecosystem, your friends and family, your neighbors, right? This is the type of sophistication that just wasn't available 5 years ago, right? Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz address this, and they have like the Ben and Mark podcast, or Mark and Ben podcast, whatever it's called, mid-October. They actually talked about this exact use case, about leveraging the ability to now build truly smart energy grid management solutions by combining blockchain technology and these new architectures for AI.
So that sounds like a great use case that can be scaled because it's a very clear process. It's very unambiguous in terms of the outcome, and you can ascribe hard dollar value to that transaction, right? So this is so those are the types of things that you want to start thinking about in terms of how you can monetize AI. It has to be repeatable, it has to be clear, it has to have an unambiguous outcome, it has to have clear value, right?
And they're not necessarily, it's not the first use case most people would think about when they think about AI, right?
Mhm.
Most people, when they think about AI and AI agents, is like, oh, I'm gonna have an assistant, and what's that thing gonna do for me? Oh, it's gonna like book my flights and hotels and stuff. It's like, no, what it's probably gonna do is make your house transactional,
Mhm.
make your car transactional. And like now we get into kind of the esoteric and fun domain, because we were talking about this before, where you got like the robot dog walking your pets, and like the currency there is not denominated in dollars. It's like pets and treats, right? And so like where it gets kind of esoteric but also super interesting is like what other actors, what other life forms can be like merged into economics and finance now, because we're moving away from just the stores of value that the three of us actually want and into stores of value that like maybe our pets want, definitely what these AIs want.
The irony of this is everybody worries about what jobs am I going to lose, but everybody uses and tries to target, to your point, AI towards replacing these goddamn jobs.
Yeah.
And the part of this, like you're saying, is there's so much depth to the use cases that people aren't thinking about it in multidimensional forms, that we're missing the picture on what a lot of these are. Well, I mean, you guys aren't.
No, but and look, the reality is like I'm not smarter than the next guy. I've just had the luxury of being able to sit here and think about this for 10 years. Most other people have not. So imagine being unshackled from this constraint of your day-to-day job, right?
Yeah.
And the stresses and shit like that, and being able to actually think about new stuff, right?
Well,
I'm very bullish on the next 100 years. I think I think we're the best, or at least one of the best organisms on this planet at responding to change, right? Evolving. And I think we're going to unshackle ourselves, and there's going to be an explosion of creativity on a scale that we haven't seen before. Like I honestly believe we're entering a new renaissance where we're unlocking the next level of human ingenuity with all of this. I do think it's going to be like there's somewhat going to be a bit of a race here, right? But I'm of the opinion that a lot of what is going to end up manifesting in the AI-derived economic ecosystem will largely be ambivalent to, and vice versa, right? Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's awesome. What about challenges? What immediate challenges do you see?
Well,
I mean, we talked about some, but like, what are some that you're having to think about? Regulation? Is it data sovereignty? I mean, especially in the DACH region and all that, the European regions, they're super ahead of the curve, we'll say, on being paranoid with a lot of this tech, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think?
It'll be interesting. Yeah. So regulatory capture of the industry is sort of an existential threat. I do take solace in the fact that like we're kind of so far afield at the moment. So at risk of sounding crazy to your audience, so one of the drivers for us, like another, Seth, you asked, is like not so much why blockchain. You were asking like, what is it and what'd you do? But there is an element, like an ethos attached to why. So we look at payments as being the choke point for AI agents. If OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, if they monopolize the means for agents to pay and get paid, their ability to shut off one agent becomes an existential threat to all agents, right? If Microsoft says, this agent is competing with my line of business, poof, you no longer have the ability to transact. That is an existential risk to all agents. Right. And so a big driver for us is providing that optionality in a decentralized fashion so that these agents always have an option for paying and getting paid. And so we do look at this, in terms of the reg side of things. One of the funny part, haha funny, and also kind of strange, crazy funny again, is the fact that like our focus is on silicon-based agent to silicon-based agent, not carbon-based agent to silicon-based agent, right? We want to see AI agents actually transact, right? Trillions of these things out there, all kind of paying or bartering with one another or whatever, right? In which case, what regulations actually apply?
Right.
Right.
There-
If these are decoupled from any human, and you talk about data sovereignty, well, I'm thinking more about agent sovereignty, right?
Okay.
If these are fully autonomous, sovereign, like self-sovereign agents, which theoretically they could be in the not too distant future, we don't have a regulatory landscape for
Yeah.
governing, right?
Yeah. Digital governments. Yeah, exactly.
So I look at it both as a threat, but also as an opportunity, right? Go ahead, capture all the, carbon-based actor, carbon-based agent market as you want. We're not going after that market. We're
Well,
going
it
after the silicon-based agent one.
It would also then, most of that regulation is, like you said, always when it hits humans. So nobody cared about solar until it hit your pocketbook, or sorry, savings, right? Savings.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about those things until, like you said, we're good at change, but at the same time, nothing or people don't change until it becomes painful, right?
Yep.
So to the point, yeah. So it'd be interesting to see if they even care until it hits humans, and then humans.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to hit us, and people are going to care.
Sure.
It's a question of how draconian the regulation becomes and who it favors. Because the reality is, it's never draconian for everyone.
Right.
It's only draconian for most.
Yeah.
And then you get this small few that benefit from the fact that they were like grandfathered in or whatever, right? And so that's what needs to be avoided. And that's also something that we're trying to provide the optionality to mitigate against. So that would definitely be a risk. I mean, the other risk, you asked about what do we need? We need agents, right? We just need more agents, and they're coming online all the time. But yeah, the reality is we're at, arguably tens of thousands of productive agents. We have a trajectory of trillions. So there's a pretty big gap in between the two.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say a registry of these kind of things too, right? So you can find them.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what we're building, right? Is like a registry or catalog, right? That's part of this protocol. In order to actually transact, you got to know what's out there. And so it's less marketplacey and more Craigslisty, right?
Yeah. For now, but yeah.
For now. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't want to build a marketplace. Let somebody else do that. I'll just build the components that feed into that. Marketplaces are,
What's your next target? Where do you want to go next?
That's a good question. Okay, so we're working on. I'm gonna leave the names out of this. It's somewhat clandestine at the moment, but there are these utilizable agents, like agents with true utility coming out, right? They do things mostly on the sales side, right? So we're thinking like developing listings of like potential customers and email campaigns, CRM management, cold calling, or like following up with actual phone calls and that sort of thing. And so what we're eating our own dog food internally. And what we really want to show is heterogeneous agents from different third-party vendors that can be used and choreographed, orchestrated, or coordinated amongst one another, and where rewards or payment can actually be facilitated.
Right.
So that's what we're working on presently. Industrializing our artificial intelligence go-to-market with agentic AI across heterogeneous agents and demonstrating the capacity of these things, but also the commerce that takes place between them.
Right.
Because in our opinion, AI agents are the vassal, but the category is AI commerce, right? This new agent that's going to be commercial in nature, that's now entering the commercial landscape. It's no longer the three of us on the internet anymore. It's also, it's also AI agents that are going to take advantage of the dead internet.
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting. So tell us, what do you do for fun? What do you do outside of work, besides work?
Yeah, well, like to move and travel. I've lived on every continent
Yeah.
except Africa and Antarctica. Yeah, traveling's a big thing for us. I've got 2 little girls, so hanging out with my family. And then when I can, I now live in Lisbon, which is quite sunny and warm.
Yeah.
But my passion is like slack country powder skiing.
Oh, wow.
So ducking the line and you know hitting the slopes. Unfortunately, we've chosen. I mean, for that one pastime, we've chosen or hobby, we've chosen sun over snow. Which being Canadian, I will choose 9 times out of 10. But yeah, that's what I like to do.
Nice. Nice. Well, this has been a pleasure. Where can people find you? We'll have information in the show notes, but tell us about where they can find you.
Yeah, I think the best place to find us is either follow us on X. So it's Nevermind, NEVERMINED_IO, or you can jump into our Discord via our website, nevermind.io, NEVERMINED.io. Yeah, we just did a fundraise. We're actively hiring. So
Nice.
anybody that wants to reach out and is interested in enabling AI agents to pay and get paid, hit us up.
And where are you located again? You said you were in Lisbon?
I'm in Lisbon in Portugal. The team's Europe based, so we're all in either continental Europe or the UK, though soon to be US as well.
Well, this has been a pleasure. Don, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And
Thanks. This has been one of the most interesting ones that we've had, right? It's been a gamut, but again, just in order to, get our listeners thinking ahead, it's been really valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in. Thanks again, Don. And thank you, Carolyn, for the work behind the scenes, and Chris. And we will see you next time on the next Early AI podcast. Have a good day. Thank you.
Visit Earley.com to find links to the full podcast on all audio platforms to listen on the go. Thank you for watching. Contact us today at info@earley.com.